Good morning. Good morning. This is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of nonprofit Utopia. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. And wherever you're listening from or viewing from, if you could take the time and share your name, let us know where you're from and all of that good stuff. If you've been following our last conversations, you are aware that our last few live streams have focused on nonprofit ethics. We talked about what ethics are, so we have a common definition, because ethics means different things to different people. And if you live in Chicago, you really know that means different things to different people. It all depends on what your position in life is, so to speak. But we won't really go that much into that part. Maybe that's a conversation for another day. But at any rate, we did focus on the ethics definition. We talked about how you, as a nonprofit, can manage your social responsibility as well as your personal responsibility. And then we talked about how you, as a board member, can develop a governance structure that would include a code of ethics and how to develop that code of ethics. Today, we're going to talk about what happens when the code of ethics is broken by people in leadership, or even not so much people in leadership, maybe something that occurs with a mid-level executive or entry-level employee gets to the point where it's no longer just a matter of concern, so to speak, but it can blow up into epic proportions and almost become a scandal. And if you're not careful, you can actually have your organization threatened to a point where you may end up having to close your doors. So we're here today to talk about crisis management and crisis communication. So ideally, your crisis management and communications would go hand in hand. We have here a strategic communications professional with a political background. Her name is Laurie Glenn. She is the founder, president, and CEO of Thinkinc, and she has significant experience not only in the political arena but nonprofit arena. It's global, it's local, and all of that good stuff. And before I go any further, I'm just going to let Laurie come to us in her own words, give us a description of her background, how she came to run Thinkinc and chose this career, but also, most importantly, to give a backdrop as to why it's important to be very strategic in your communications at all times so that you can actually, when bad times hit like this, you'll be prepared. So not just strategic communications, but having a plan in place as insurance beforehand. So without further ado, Laurie, we're going to let you give us the backdrop.
Well, thank you, Valerie. I've always been an admirer of yours and the work that you've done. And as a thought leader, I actually follow you on social media to see what you're into and what you're thinking about. So when you reached out to me, I was actually really honored. So thank you for having me here. And for all of you on the show, I'm actually generally on the behind the scenes. Most of you will never have heard of me, and that is purposeful because our work is about building the leaders that we support. And I'm also really shy, even though I have a big personality. So I get stage fright. And I hope you love my lovely home. I thought this background was hilarious. No, not my office, though. I wish I did play the piano, though I do play the guitar. Thinkinc is a political and public affairs consulting firm on social justice issues. You can't just hire us for anything. We are about building social movements. We have specialized in working with communities of color, Black, Latino, Muslim, and Asian, and Islander, and LGBTQ, and everyone, both in Chicago, nationally, and in Europe. I'm very proud of the work we've done with leadership development through the German Marshall Fund. And we have leaders that are friends, allies, and mentees in the European Union. That is like so cool.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, we're political strategists. Secondly, because everything starts with ideas. It's all about having a great idea. And by the way, if you hire a consultant, they should never be, and this is a terrible analogy considering we do all this work on anti-gun violence, but we are not a silver bullet. We do, please don't bring a consultant in to save you. Bring a consultant in to partner with you, to assist you in identifying your own power, your own strategic thinking, your own ideas. The worst thing you can do is to become infantilized by a consultant. The best work I do is with my clients who now I work myself out of a job. They're better than I am at what I do. And they may keep me around because, you know, I'm kind of funny. So they, no, because we're trying to build social movements. And without the next generation, as we've seen in the Democratic Party and other places, we must build that bench. So Thinkinc really thinks about that when we partner with our clients. Secondly, you can't do anything alone in the world. You really need to, hey, Deanna, you really need to, I am going to be on Deanna Shah's show tomorrow to talk about how I got knighted by the French government, but I'm not talking about that today. I'm talking about that tomorrow. Anyway, so you can call me Lady Laurie. That's my big joke. Please don't. I think it's hilarious and alliterative. And I thought I would like maybe make a jazz club the name of that. So anyway, we can't do anything alone. So partnerships is really important. And I want you to think about that because when you have a crisis, you're going to want to think about all those allies that you have built in advance because you can't organize alone. You can't sell a product alone. You can't have people live in an apartment building all by yourself if you're a developer. So you've got allies, which also means you have opposition and undecideds. Because in my life as a former political consultant running electoral campaigns, everything is a campaign. And like in a campaign, you win or lose. And it's like being a little bit pregnant. It doesn't work like that. And oh my God, shame on the Supreme Court while we're at it.
Yes.
On that note, moving on, we also do communications, strategic communications, both traditional, social media, the whole shebang. But I really want, this is the most important message I can ever send, which is communications is not, oh, let's send a news release out and like at the end of the day. That is the worst kind of communications. To build power, influence, to become a thought leader, to become an important organization, an important leader that people care about. Communications, which is both internal and external, and how you touch people, and that disgusting word brand, but how you think about your brand and what you do as an organization. The most important thing you can do is think about those issues integrated in your strategic planning so that the person who does your comms work is not somebody who has not had any experience necessarily, though I am all for building and bringing in young leadership. But it is to bring in senior people. And also, let me be clear, ladies and gentlemen, if there are any out there and everything in between, there is that fundraising and communications, well, they're not the same thing. And when you conflate them, like, oh, I have the director of fundraising communications, and I know I have some clients now who will be upset at me saying this, that to me is the worst message, because communications and strategic communications and how you build power and influence in the world is not, should support your fundraising, but they are not the same thing. And they are different skill sets, though they can be complementary. And one must really think strategically about when you've got a problem, it's not going to be about fundraising. It's going to be about having a strategic vision of your organization and how you're going to have thought in advance about that. We also do leadership development and organizational change. As Mr. Trump showed us, having sick people run organizations like our nation is really unhealthy for our democracy and very divisive. And I'm a registered lobbyist just because, though we are not lobbyists and we don't lobby. But I get scared if I call someone and it's considered lobbying. So I try to be safe. Oh, I know, because that's part of my brand, right?
Right.
I'm a clean gene. And that probably dates me. And that's talking about Eugene McCarthy, who ran for president in
Right. Right.
1968. And that was his tagline and stuck with me since I was a child, actually. So think about that when you think about good taglines. That
Right.
means that I think about what my brand is, and all of you as organizations and leaders, I think about mine, which is I'm honest, direct. Some people hate that for sure. And but I am, I am clean. I don't work with, I'm not shady. I don't take money under the table. I don't do anything unethical. That is, why I'm a trusted brand. I think with reporters, I have wonderful relationships. And oh, by the way, I want you to think of media relations. It's about relationship building. It's all about relations, right? And
Mhm.
building relationships. So that means when you're doing your communications as well, remember thinking about those allies, that you don't want to just in any moment go me, and because really people just have, jealousy and envy issues. And I think it's better to think we. And I don't mean that by yes or going to the bathroom. I mean, like, think about us, how we can work together. And this actually is very important in crisis communications. I was just mentioning to Valerie before we got on that I worked with someone who just had a huge explosion or implosion in their life. And I won't
Mhm.
use names here, but you can all play a guessing game. But really, the first thing that I thought about when my client came to me, who I love and respect tremendously, is who are your allies in what's going on in this community? And how can you use this moment to build power and influence for this community and their needs in the way that it's not being met by the city, state, or feds? And that was the initial thing, is to figure out even how to engage people who might be in semi opposition because of history or herstory that goes on in a community, but you
Mhm.
find yourself that you are what was once called unholy bedfellows. But with the Me Too movement, maybe that's incorrect to say that, but
Right.
you actually really got to change one's language over time.
Mhm.
But my point is that you need to really be thinking in advance. And if I could segue now
Mhm.
into how you address a crisis, because really that is my understanding, is what do you do, whether you're an individual or an organization or a social movement
Mhm.
or whatever, and you find yourself in the crossbow or whatever, like you
Right.
got a problem.
And
Now,
a
it's,
question for you too,
yes.
before you go any further. How do we differentiate a crisis, right, from, just an internal concern?
Well, I think that this is an art and not a science.
Got it.
So, and nothing I do is a cookie cutter. I have clients who come to me all the time and go, well, what should we do for this? And it's like, well, what's the circumstance? What's the situation? So I think everything has to be contextualized. So I kind of push back a little bit to say, I don't know until I'm in the situation where it might be a one off, it's internal, and you need to look at your guidelines for how people treat one another in an organization and address that one person. But maybe you just found out that it's not one person, but it's 20 people doing the same thing.
So that's Deanna's answer to the question, how do you determine whether it's a crisis or just a concern?
Right. But I think that very often a crisis, like I had one client who had two crises in 1 year. This is a long time ago. It's a very large not for profit in Chicago. And a tragedy happened where they had a building with women who were being protected from men who were abusing them, and
Mhm.
a child had the building had an old fashioned elevator where one door opens, you pull it, and the other you pull it open. The mother walked in with another one of the child she was holding, the other smaller child who was 3 or 5 years old. Slip between, it's hard to believe, but slip between these two doors. The elevator moved and tore her apart. I mean, like, this couldn't be more horrifying if you tried.
Right.
The executive director was in Washington, D.C. at the time. This was, nothing you could have controlled. But let's talk about that. So what happened? So I got a call from a woman who I worked with, and I still am so happy to call my friend. And this organization is still one of the most powerful nonprofits in Chicago after this situation. So what did we do? First, we were like, where's the ED? Let's get a hold of her. Now, this is before cell phones, I think. So this was more complex, right, than just texting her and saying, get here now. This is like tracking them down, calling, finding all the places they are. But meanwhile, while we're waiting for the executive director, who was a strong ED. Now, in these instances, you also need to make aware your board of directors, especially in different organizations. Some boards are stronger than others. Some chairs are stronger than others. But all of this should be done in advance, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But at this point, we didn't have a plan, really. So what did we do? We got the facts. First, we got a lawyer, right? You must get an attorney. Now, remember, attorneys hate working with public relations people, just so you know. So you have to manage the tension that you're going to get between the lawyer who says, say nothing, which is awful, and is just like, we don't do anything with the media. But I think most lawyers are more savvy now, but I've dealt with a lot of lawyers who are like that, and you have to negotiate with them about what can be said and what can't. But you also don't want your client to get in trouble because they say something that really incriminates them unintentionally. So I want to say there's a tension between transparency, which I always go for, and honesty, which I am never lying to the media. You never lie, period. That's it. There's no white lie. Like I once exaggerated the number of people thinking, because my client told me, 1,000 people would show up at a rally, and I think 100 people showed up. Now I work with the TV in Chicago all the time, and that was not good. And because they gave me a hall pass because I have a very good relationship and I don't exaggerate, but I was very hard on my clients after that. Like, really, how many people are coming to this? Because it sometimes is important to let the media know, like, this is a big deal. 1,000 people or 10,000 people are coming, but 50 people show up and you ruin your credibility. So that extends to a crisis, right? So you must just stick to the facts. And by the way, forget adjectives. Oh, it's it's awesome. Oh, it's unique. Oh, it's incredible. Oh, don't overdo your language because it doesn't feel authentic. And actually, that word authentic is hard to use now, but you actually want to be your authentic self as an institution. And that is so important to not suddenly become Ram in a sweater telling the city, really, I'm a nice guy and I never give you the finger. So you don't want to do stuff like that because nobody believes you. You want to stay on point with how your institution works. So meanwhile, we have the city of Chicago is coming to, look at the situation. You've got police coming, you've got everything, and you've got the media coming. So what do? First, we kept the media out of the space, no matter how many reporters called and begged me, hey, Laurie, how's it going? Could we just for, our 5 o'clock news get a little roll? And it's like, are you freaking kidding me? No, never. I will never let you in this building. As we know, if it bleeds, it leads. And I used to say at 5 o'clock, if your dog gets an award, you get it, you'll get on the 5 o'clock news. And between 5 and 10, if the dog dies, you'll get on the 10. Okay. So that was very important. Now you think, what's the big deal? It's a contained building. No, reporters are very, very, teddy bears with claws, my favorite reporters. So they're sneaky in a good way. So it's their job to get what they want. And it's your job to make sure you take care of your organization and client and don't fall for that. Oh, just let me in to take a picture. The worst, a picture says 1,000 words, and they might not be the right words. because the most important thing about this entire story was this organization not diligent? And had this elevator been checked within the last 6 months, or whether or not it was legal and correct? Because if it's legal and correct, then this organization, it's just a tragedy. Now, don't take it the wrong way, but I mean, it's a tragedy, but it's not on the organization. So we put off having a press conference or anything for almost 24 hours till we got to the bottom of it. Now, can you imagine in the city of Chicago,
Wow.
the department where elevators get certified and getting through to everyone, when everyone just wants to blame the not-for-profit, you understand that, and go home. Oh, they were in the wrong. This is terrible. And the not-for-profit is then destroyed.
Right.
And then while we're doing this, we had to talk to the mother. Now, how do you think that felt? And talk to the mother to see if the mother is going to try and blame or sue the not-for-profit, or stand with the not-for-profit to say that this is a good organization, I'm grateful to be here, and this is a tragedy. So I did that. So we did that. And we talked to the woman who was, as you can only imagine, out of her mind, and she agreed to stand with the not-for-profit. Now, you have to do things sometimes that are just the most horrible thing you can imagine. But you have to, because you want to give that woman an opportunity to decide, what does she want to do at this moment in time? Because actually, this organization, this building, was to keep her safe. And we had to keep on top of it, this was a safe building for women. And we couldn't let the media give the address out, because then all these men would know that their women who they had beaten were in this building and they could get them. So this was so complicated, but we did it. And we got everyone in the team together. So we had a very clear understanding. We got all the leadership together. We had calls together. Everybody was on the same page. The executive director flew in. We brought her in. She's obviously, in this case, she was a strong board executive director who was really in charge here. Most importantly, we got to the city and we found out that everything had been legally done. This organization was not in the wrong. And what did we do? So we had a very clear message. So messaging, it's the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost of messaging. That's this Jew, as I say all the time. And you have 3 key messages. And so this is a horrible tragedy, right? That is the most important thing. We are so sorry. We really are. This is just, there's nothing that will make this okay. And we did everything that the city told us to do. And here is the certification that we were compliant with the city of Chicago with this elevator. Period. That's it. And maybe we're replacing this elevator with a different elevator. And you move on. And that organization still stands. And it was over because there was nothing. First of all, we didn't let the media in to see. So there's no pictures for them. So there's no photos of a bloody elevator, you know, showing how the child had been torn apart. We had the mother who spoke at the press conference outside of the building. We had everybody unified. We had people from the community unified. We had as many people as we could to show how this organization was a solid, stable, respected member of the community. And it was done. It was done within 4 days.
Wow. Now, if the shoe were on the other foot, suppose they were negligent, right? And they called you, Laurie to the rescue.
I wouldn't take them. No, I'm kidding. So this is the most important thing. And you have to do it in a way, though, because liability, and this is where the lawyers get involved.
Got it.
I believe the most important 3 words, other than I love you in the world, is I am sorry.
Got it.
And own it. Not like, I'm sorry you feel this way. And actually, I want to give a shout out to one of my clients. I will say Teresa Cordova, who I love, director of Great Institute. And I said I was sorry once to her, but I really didn't say I'm sorry for what I did. I did say I'm sorry for how you feel. And she said, Laurie, no, really? And she was right. So that's why I'm outing myself. So it's not like Oh, Media 101. Don't answer that question. Deanna, you got to stop this. You're like Deanna Shas, who I love, my close friend and,
Uh,
and a great consultant. You should
she
hire her.
is. She
So
is.
anyway, the fact is you have to say you're sorry sometimes. It's so important. And you just
Mhm.
sometimes have to admit you're wrong. And I actually
Mhm.
think when, in my own organization, when we make a mistake, there's no obfuscating. People don't
Mhm.
like that.
Right.
People want to see that you are authentic. So I had something happen where I advised a client who did end up in jail, but I helped get him there because uh, he was corrupt, and I didn't know it at first.
Mhm.
But initially, I had told him to talk to an investigative reporter at the Tribune. And another colleague of mine, Terry Savage, who is an old time, I don't mean to say old Terry, sorry. I mean, a long time, our grandmothers were even friends,
Mhm.
colleague and friend. And I told her what I was doing, and she said, "No, Lori, do not, under any circumstance, let this client talk to this reporter who's actually a very famous investigative reporter with the Chicago Tribune." So I had to bring my client in and say to them, I made a mistake. I used those words. I
Right.
was wrong. I think you should fire me but you should not talk to this reporter. I was wrong. Please don't do it. I canceled it. And instead of firing me, they gave me a year's contract. Unfortunately, since they were so corrupt, and in the end, I had to help put them in prison. But at the time, I did not know this. So I think what I'm saying is you really have to be, you know, you can segue. There are times we all know the basics of media, which is somebody, Richard Nixon, the very famous line, which is, "I am not a crook." How did that happen? Because somebody said, "Are you a crook?" And instead of just saying, I'm, not answering that question, he repeated, which you never do, "I am not a crook." And that just became the tagline
Mm.
for this man forever. But on the other side of it, Tylenol, if you all remember, Tylenol got tampered. This is years ago. It's a classic crisis communications case, and people died. It was tragic across the country. It was a crazy person who was tampering. And the CEO got up and just said, "I am sorry. This was terrible. This is tragic. And we are going to do X, Y, and Z to make sure this never happens again." But they didn't obfuscate. He didn't try to sidestep it. He got on TV with his rolled up shirt sleeves, with the
Mhm.
open neck, not a tie, not a suit, looking like a human being, even though he was an old white man. And he was forgiven. The company was forgiven. So if there is something wrong, then what you have to do is say, "This is what was wrong." Again, stick with the facts. This is our remediation of what we're going to do. And this is what we're going to do for the family. And you have to own it, and you have to then move forward. And I'm sorry, I will argue to the nth degree always. Honesty, transparency, and
Mhm.
learning from that lesson. And if you show people that you are learning from that lesson, then your customers, whether they be that you're a thought leader and people listening to you and
Mhm.
on social media, or whether you own a building where a child has been killed, or millions of other things, you
Mhm.
will keep your brand intact, because part of your brand will be integrity, will be
Mhm.
honesty, that you took the hit, that you would rather that the people that you are supposed to be taking care of are the first and most important thing, not your shareholders, but the people who use the product.
Mhm.
They are your primary audience,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
so you look at organizations now, and you say, oh my God, they make me, I don't want to buy them. I won't support them because of their politics, because they don't seem to care about people, right? They're
Mhm.
not people first, they're shareholder first.
Okay.
So that's what I would say to that. Next.
Yeah, that's awesome stuff, and I really, really do appreciate your opening our heads up, so to speak. I know that's doesn't conjure up the best image, but opening our heads up and pouring knowledge in is
Yeah.
always great stuff. So, what does a strategic communications plan look like? And I know that's different for every organization, but what are some of the common elements you might include?
Well, those are, so just to clarify, a strategic communications plan is one thing.
Okay.
Crisis communications plan is another. Would you like me to describe that, or a comms plan,
Yeah, if you
or
could do
both?
both. Yeah, both. So other people won't make the same mistake that I'm making using the two interchangeably.
Yeah. So overall, we strongly urge organizations to have strategic communications plans. And these are ongoing working documents. We have worked with, I'm very proud of the work we've done with Communities United and Voice. They're one of the most
Ah,
powerful, growing organizations working in social justice, on criminal justice reform, getting cops out of schools. I honor their leadership. There are no words, and I've had the honor of working with them for, oh my God, close, maybe 15 plus years, maybe
awesome.
20. But anyway, and we've worked together again. So it's not just Laurie coming in and doing a strategic communications plan. We've worked hand in glove with their senior leadership team. So a strategic communications plan, really, you start with what is the vision of the organization and mission. And this is actually an opportunity, and brand, really, but
Mhm.
to look at your own vision statement. Is this a real living document? Is it just filled with adjectives? Have you been using the same one for 20 years? Does it actually reflect the reality of your organization, right? And
Mhm.
then that's your dream of what you're trying to achieve. And then your mission statement, which I think of as the, how you get there. It's the road you walk on, what you do to achieve your vision. And then you look at those, and then you look at whatever let's say you're trying to do a plan for the next year, or 18 months, or even 6 months, or a specific project. Okay. You can do a plan for either very big vision things or specific projects that you want to achieve. And you will actually then go, what is my goal? And then what is my objective? And again, your goal is something that's longer term. And so you want to pass legislation, and then a piece of legislation, let's say. And then the objective might be, and we want to build the alliance with the governor, our state senator, state rep, and some of our other key allies in the church-based community, other social service organizations, and even we want some community players involved, because we want to do this to get X to move this legislation forward, right? Does that make sense, right? So we start with our goals and then our objectives. And then we have to think about, who is our audience? Who are we trying to influence? And then we need to think about who influences the people who we want to that make the decisions, right? So
Mhm.
what we call that is a power analysis. And so I always think it's so important that organizations look at a power analysis and look at them. Are they my ally? If they are, what can they do for us? Who are they connected to? Are they our opposition? Are they going to try and stop us? And are they going to try and prevent us from getting what we want? And then who's the undecideds who you want to influence to become part of your team? I think a power analysis is always like a basic thing for an organization to do, regardless. And if you don't understand it, give me a text or call, because
Mhm.
I think that this is something that all groups need to really seriously think about. Because once you know who you're talking to, then you can develop your message, right? Those three key
Mhm.
messages. Now, in a campaign, you have over all three key messages, and then you can have kind of sub-gum messages, right? for targeted audiences that you are specifically trying to reach. But you're not going to develop a message just because you like it. Okay. I want you to think about this. That is narcissism. What you need to think about is, what is a message that is going to influence and other people can hear you? And I want everyone to think too, you can say, oh, I want people to think this in the world, or this. Here's my hand.
Okay, all right. And take a pause right there. I just want to get your email address so I can flash it on the screen.
It's L.R. Glenn, Glenn, at, I'll say it then spell it, thinkincstrategy.com, THINK as in kite, INC as in cat, strategy.com. I know it's ridiculously long, but Think Inc. was already taken when we had to create them. So again, your messaging is so critical, and you have to think about, okay, you want people to at some point get to this place, but you can't to first go to where people are and accept who they are and what is the language they use. Now, you're not going to always like what a communications person's up. So I did a story once years ago for St. Leonard's House, actually. And this is in the 90s. Like, I am so way old. It's surprising I'm not a skeleton up here. But it's like, and they were opening a new house next to the United Center. And they're with the people who are formerly incarcerated. So this is the mid 90s though. So this whole world that we were actually thinking instrumental in developing around criminal justice reform, and the organizations we've worked with, which we are so proud of the work that our groups have done. And we've played a very tiny role, just to say that, but we have. And at the time though, I wrote a news release that said, ex-cons, I admit it, I wrote it, ex-cons get, lift from, St. Leonard's House, blah, blah, blah. So of course the executive director calls me in a tizzy, so angry. They're not ex-cons, they are the formerly incarcerated, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my God, I am so sorry. I had no idea. So I didn't know. It wasn't like I was being disrespectful. That was the lexicon. And then I said to him, I promise I will never use that language again. I will use the formerly incarcerated, but don't get mad at me. And I will not say a word to a reporter about ex-cons ever. They are the formerly incarcerated, and I will change my language. But guess what the lead headline was, either in the Tribune or the Sun-Times or both? The reporter used ex-cons, the headline writer, because it's not the reporters who write the headlines. They have headline writers, right? And it's ex-cons. So you have to understand that language is a process and that we can't change it necessarily overnight. And I even heard somebody use that expression recently, and I was kind of shocked, actually, because now I think we all know that there are other ways to talk about people who unfortunately in their life happen to be incarcerated, either fairly or unfairly, as we know, many people, especially for low-level drug offenses, who should never have been arrested in the first place. So that's to say, messaging is king and queen, okay? Very important. And you need to really think about who you're going to, how you're going to use it. Then after you think about so now remember, vision, mission, goals, objectives, audience, then messaging. Then you want to think about, what are your resources? Because there's nothing worse than trying to achieve something that you can't do because you don't have the money, you don't have the human power, you can't hire a firm necessarily to do it. And you have to really think about what's achievable. There's nothing worse than doing an action and it not going well. It diffuses the energy out of your movement and people. I remember I did a press conference for what was SEIU's home care worker union with Keith Kelleher when he was the executive director, and before he turned it into the behemoth it is now. It has a bigger, better name, and it's statewide, and it's awesome. But we were on the road to power at that point, and we decided we would work with this researcher at UIC to release a report. And we had the timing off of the day that the legislature was making certain decisions. And so because of that being off that day, we were doing it the day that voting was happening. We had no reporters. I mean, this is one of the only times in my career no reporters really showed up at this press conference that we did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, you can only imagine how it made the leaders, the home care worker leaders feel. And that was awful. And so what a lesson learned. So even now, I won't do a press conference unless we have other reasons to have people come together in case reporters don't show up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but also it was the timing, and we had been given wrong information actually by their lobbyists for whatever reason. Everybody has their agendas as well.
Right.
And so I think you want to really think about what you can achieve. And then you design your tactics. And then and I want you to think about, though, in designing these tactics, how do you bring your allies in? Again, this is not about building your power, it's about building our power. You can never go to a bank for a loan when you need it. You can only go to a bank for a loan when you've got money in the bank. And that is this, and that applies here as well as to crisis communications, which I'll talk about in a minute. So this plan, you really want to think about building something that you bring in your allies. You think about your talking points. You think about who you're trying to influence and what outlets you're trying to influence. And then you're going to write up what you're going to do. And then when you've done this, to evaluate it, there's many ways to evaluate, but you go back to your vision and your goals and objectives and your vision and mission. And you see, did this move this forward? And don't beat yourself up. Like, maybe a little bit. We all do that if things work or don't work. But really try and see, did you move the needle on the dial a bit? And then learn from this, assess from it. Don't make it be oh, it's so sad. Just go, this is what we learned. We shouldn't do that again. We should do more of this. It's the start doing, stop doing, do more of kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, the difference between a strategic communications plan and a crisis communications plan is that you have to have, in a crisis communications plan, there's really actually, I actually went back to some of my notes, as I told Valerie, because I did a bunch of this work at different times. So you do want to do a situation analysis, like, and I know you think I'm in a crisis. How can I write anything down? But I think writing things down clarifies things in mind. And also you force people to read it and they don't get confused about it. And I've also found you have to keep things short now. And in fact, I read memos to clients because a lot of times people learn in different ways. So sometimes people have to listen to something versus reading something. And you just have to be sensitive to that. Especially, obviously, we work with the communities living with disabilities, and we want to be sensitive to how we communicate with our clients. Again, you want to go, what is our purpose and objective? You have to think about who are all the stakeholders that are going to be touched by this crisis, right? You want to identify the crisis communications team and their respective responsibilities. This is not a democracy, okay? You want to be democratic and everything else you do. This is a pyramid because you can't mess up. One mistake in crisis communications can destroy your organization. So you need to have a team leader. And it may not always be the same person because someone might be the expert in this particular area that you are dealing with, and you need them to be the team leader. And then your communications person will partner with them. And you want in your communications team the heads of all your departments and people on the ground. You are not like, oh, let us tell all the little people what we want them to hear. Like, you don't tell people. What you want is you want to bring people up. We create everything we create today. When we work with clients, we just help to create an initiative called Earth Art Chicago, which we're very proud of. And we did co-creation. We did all these interviews with people, but then we actually co-created the initiative with people, artists in the community, environmentalists in the community, members of the community. So it's not something we're doing to them. It's something we're doing with them. I want you to think about this. When you develop that crisis communications team, Do you have people that you might consider not your senior leadership? And what about that person who's answering the phone? Now, I know a lot of phones don't get answered now, but they still do. Or the person who's going to be your frontline person communicating, which is not even talking about the spokesperson. I'm talking about who are they aware of this crisis? Could a reporter call them and they're going to go, well, I don't know. Or I'm going to like, oh, I think somebody got killed. Or maybe someone got shot. Or maybe somebody did something wrong. Did you tell them? No, you get a reporter calls. And what do you need from a reporter? Are they on deadline, right? Most importantly, what media organization? Spell their name out. Get their cell phone number, their email address, repeat it back. And then you never give the reporter to your leaders. You say they're in a meeting. And yes, all the reporters in the world, I tell my clients to say that. So that even if they call you, they're going to say they're in a meeting because you need to think about what you're going to say. And if you've got a consultant or the inside person who is your key leader, you don't talk to reporters until the two of you confer. And you make sure, because you want to know who that reporter is. And that's about having relationships with reporters. And this is about knowing who the media landscape is that covers what your work is. And these are things you don't do when you have a crisis. That's what you do in advance. Right? And then you want to have a clear line of authority with clear roles. So people don't go, well, I thought you were going to do that. No, 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 no. Everybody's got to know, this is what you do. This is what I do. This is what she, he, and they do. Okay. And then you have to have a list of key media and you have to know who they are. And if you don't, hire somebody who does. Because if, Fran Spielman from the Chicago Sun-Times, I had a very important leader once call me who will go nameless, which would embarrass them to no end, 20 years ago. And they were terrified because Fran Spielman had called them and said, what do I do, Laurie? I was like, I don't know. I'm scared of her too. I don't know what we do. Let's think about it. She's really important. And that's deference and honor to the power of Fran Spielman.
Yes.
As a woman reporter who went up through the ranks when, as we know, men had much more power than women. So power to her. So then you have to pre-gather all your information and develop your key messages. And I just want you to think about, you need to gather all the facts and you can't be afraid to know. You need to know. This is not one of those things where you're like, I don't want to know they're cheating on me. I really don't. Like, no, you really do.
Right.
So anyway, I've been going on. Does that help?
Yeah, it helps a whole lot. And I thank you for that. So once you get the plans in place, so to speak, and I guess another key difference between the two is one is you're more proactive and the other one you can't help but be reactive because you don't really know.
Well, no, I've got right here. I found the let's see, I can't know if I can show it there.
I can see it.
So this is the Chicago Teachers Union Crisis Communication Plan from November 2002.
Awesome.
That we drafted with them. It's 7 pages long. And we overview 5 crisis communications overview, 5 stages of a crisis, what's in the crisis communications plan, thoughts on tactics. And then we have 2 kinds of crises, reactive, proactive. We talk about everything, quick response, communications SWAT team and action plan.
Wow.
Organization is key to the effective management of a crisis. Information gathering and assessment, key spokespersons, identifying and notifying key stakeholders. And we list them out who they are. I'm not going to show that to you.
Wow.
And then internal communications, message development, tactics, tracking, analysis. And then I have a crisis communications checklist. So this is all in advance, in a plan. So if something goes wrong, this plan is written and you know what to do. You have an action plan in place. And we have 10 do's for media interviews, 10 don'ts. We have, everything was ready so that when things blew up, which they did under that set of leadership, at that point I quit. So I don't want to talk about it. But
Wow.
I want to say that, you both are plans, but they're like a crisis communications plan is a sub plan of an overall strategic communications plan.
That's amazing. See, I learned something. I thought if you had a crisis communications plan, that doesn't get developed until the crisis because you can't predict the crisis.
If you own a building and there's a fire, you can think right now, what happens? I had this happen. I was in France. I used to live between France and the United States. And it was 5 o'clock. And I was driving up from the south of France to Paris. And I get a call from a former client who was a developer. And I was like, nothing looks good about this. Do I take this call or not? Oh my goodness. Am I back? I'm back.
Right.
7 people had died. It was just tragic. And the developer actually had left the scene. And it was very, very complex. And there had been no plan in place. There were problems with the management team. I don't know what's going on. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think one of our internet connections might be slower.
Yeah. Am I back?
Yes, ma'am.
So the issue is maybe should I stop my camera? Maybe it will make it stronger.
You can, but so far you're okay now.
All right, I'll try. So, so what was wrong with this picture? Well, there had been no internal planning about a crisis. That was the biggest problem they had. And in fact, hadn't called me till 2 days later and hadn't at that point, the city and police and fire commissioner had a press conference without the developer there because they were in another state at that point. Instead of rushing toward the action, they'd rushed away from it. But if you're a developer and you own hundreds of units or 10 units or 5 units, what happens when there's a fire? What are you going to do? Do you have a manager, a management team? Have you got a plan of action for that? So all of these things are very important. And also, what are you going to do for the 7 families? Have you thought about if somebody dies in my building, I'm going to create a fund immediately in their name to help them. I'm going to make sure that the rest of the family is safe. I'm going to do something to prevent fires like this from happening again in general. And what is our remediation plan in our building? So if you have a building, you could have mold. I had another client who's quite famous, and they had mushrooms growing out of their walls. There was a problem with this particular drywall. So again, they had not had a plan in place. And yet, if you're a developer, I would say to all of you, think about all the things that can go wrong in your building. Or if you are working with people who have mental health issues, a lot of things can go wrong because, people aren't feeling good in the world today. So how are you going to manage if something happens with one of your team members, whether they're working virtually or you're working in a building together? How are you going to handle if you have a COVID outbreak? If you've rejoined all your workers together, you have an open space, office, and your, 20 of your 30 workers get COVID. How do you respond to that? So I think that what I'm talking about is that you need to take the time in advance to think about, based on your organization and what it does, what you're going to do. And whether it comes down to embezzlement which we've dealt with as well, identifying what are the issues and learning from that and saying, we have found and identified what the problem is. Was the problem. This is what we're doing to solve the problem so this won't happen again, especially if you have fiduciary responsibility for people's money, right? So I think every organization is unique and different. Please don't hire consultants who come in and say, oh, this is, what I do, and this is my cookie cutter. I think that's complete BS. I think that everybody's unique and different, and they deserve your bringing to the table, if you're a consultant, the history or herstory you have with your work. You are also just one voice. You are not necessarily right. I learned this. I used to come in, I was like, I was the expert. I knew best. You were kind of stupid. That's why you hired me if you didn't need me. And now I feel I will never work for clients or with my clients because we work as a team together that I don't respect and love and think are awesome creatures, which I do. I have incredible clients. And I just think it's an issue. And over time, and believe me, it's taken me years to actually get people to understand that strategic communications is as valuable as anything you do in your organization. Because at that point, especially with the advent of social media, where you can be destroyed with a tweet, right? Which is horrifying. That you need to be thoughtful about the image of your organization, be thoughtful about what you say. I don't mean not to be powerful about what you say, but be thoughtful and mindful of what you say. I mean, Jack Kennedy said, yes, I know he was a white man, but he was president. And he said, if everybody loves you, you've done nothing in the world. So I'm not saying you're not going to piss people off. I've been known to do that.
Yes.
But I think that you want to think about it. And in a crisis, especially, you want to think about the impact of your actions. Thanks, Jessica.
Yes, Jessica, we really, really appreciate your feedback. And Deanna, we definitely appreciate your ongoing participation. We can hardly wait for your show tomorrow. And Laurie, you're going to be a guest on Deanna's show.
Yes, I am. I'm very much looking forward to it. I was deeply honored by the French government to get the Merit of Order. And which was shock and dismay in a good way. And I'm excited to talk about it with Deanna Schaas tomorrow on her podcast. And again, Deanna's just a wonderful woman, leader, consultant, so creative, strategic, and with lots and lots of energy. So, and I just want to thank you, Valerie Leonard. You are such a wonderful thought leader and someone who's done so much in your life. And I'm so grateful that you would think to have me on your show. It really meant so much.
Oh, thank you. I really, really appreciate that we did nothing. We did not follow my which is the best decision I ever made.
Well, just let's think about it as jazz.
Right. Wow. Yeah, all that jazz. That's a great analogy, but this was awesome. It was much better than anything that I ever anticipated. And I knew it was going to be great because you're always great, right?
Well, thank you.
You're always great. But I think the best decision I made was not to follow my little outline. It would not have done you justice.
Well, thank you. I actually have to go. I have a client meeting with one of the clients I just talked about.
Okay. All right, then.
So, thank you. Thank you. And to be continued, Valerie. I look forward to seeing all the great things you'll continue to do.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And I'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Later.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.